The House and Senate, and I don't know if the president signed off on it. I think he already has a $1.5 trillion bill to fund the government, and not included in that is $15 billion, 1% of funding to support COVID relief, to support, and we're not talking about things like, keep people at home so that they get unemployment. We're talking about things like paying for vaccinations, paying for antivirals, contact tracing, data keeping. I mean, the amount of things that's going to run out in the next couple of days, we'll talk about that, is extraordinary. And apparently Nancy Pelosi.
Congratulations, Alex, on your nuptials.
I buried the lead. Nancy Pelosi doesn't want to talk about it. Here she is yesterday at a press conference. Excuse me.
Madam Speaker. I just want to dig into that a little bit more on the COVID relief.
This will be your third time.
My third time, what, ask about COVID relief?
Yeah.
Well, it's substantive. You like substantive questions, so I just want to make sure.
Yeah, while people are dying in Ukraine and all of that,
People are dying from COVID too. Do you plan to offset it?
We have to offset it.
You do have to offset it.
We have to offset it, and that's what we'll have to go to. And I would hope that the sensitivities of those to any offset would be, the equity would be weighed as to what we need to do to save lives and livelihood and prevent the creation of a new variant. Yeah, it would be offset.
You said you're disappointed. I mean,
what
is your
we don't
message?
have it right now. That we don't have it right now. We have everything else right now, and we don't have it right now.
Message to those colleagues who nitpick kind of over that.
I've communicated my message to them. Yes, ma'am.
So there it is. I mean, the idea that she wants to avoid talking about COVID because there's deaths in Ukraine, which is, I mean, nice try.
I mean, it's a very glib press conference line. And I have been so, I think just, it's hard to describe myself as disillusioned because I've been disillusioned for most of my adult life, but like the congressional process is just so deeply broken that I can't even follow this in the TikTok way I used to, and so I just get the impression that if you are just there's no defense for how we cannot accomplish very obvious necessary things, you're just going to get upset when people question you on it, and I think that's a pretty understandable response from the speaker there.
Well, here is the thing that and the dynamic is this, right? There's a $15 billion need for COVID programs, I guess is the best way to call it. The Republicans are insisting that they are paid for. That and they're insisting that they're paid for from monies that have yet to be spent in certain jurisdictions around the country. And so obviously the Congress people from those areas, those states are like, wait, you can't pull that money back. And it's also money that we shouldn't pull back. It's money that we should have in reserve for these different things. But if you can't get it passed, then I can see that she would be frustrated. But the idea that the words Republicans don't come out of her mouth, the idea that there's not an opportunity to say, I mean, this is from Ed Young in The Atlantic. Next week, the government will have to cut shipments of the monoclonal antibody treatments by a third. In April, it will no longer be able to reimburse healthcare providers for testing, vaccinating, or treating millions of uninsured Americans who are disproportionately likely to be unvaccinated and infected. In June, it won't be able to support domestic testing manufacturers, can't buy extra doses of antiviral pills or infection-preventing treatments that immunocompromised people are banking on. They need to scale back efforts to improve vaccination rates in poor countries, which we have already, and all these things that I'm listing, we're not even doing it well with the funding. Never mind where it's going to be. But what's going to happen if this money doesn't go through is it's going to be, because eventually there's going to be another variant, it seems. Or let's put it this way. It's very possible there's going to be another variant. And it could be this BA variant. Maybe it's a different one. Maybe it never happens. and you've spent or you've allocated 1% of the budget here, but to not like foresee this could be a problem in 6 months, and not to set the table, at least with the Republicans are intruding upon this, and they're going to pull back money from these districts and those districts. I mean, it just seems like there's no politics here. You can't say.
It seems like a complete breakdown. This is what's odd about it, is that it does seem like a breakdown of the kind of politics that Democrats traditionally have been much more comfortable doing, which is kitchen table stuff, and not demonizing Republicans, but the sort of thing where you just say, my good friends on the other side are holding this up, and then I mean, this is the terrain that traditionally they have felt very comfortable fighting in, and I genuinely don't understand why there's so much unwilling to acknowledge this is a potential crisis. I don't know. It's honestly baffling.
I think the answer is in her first response, which is that the Democrats have decided, like, this is the war in Ukraine, the invasion by the Russians, is the single most important. Like, it's the way they can avoid all of it.
Yeah, so they can get out of having to stake out positions on literally everything.
And this is the second time that they've tried to use Russia's actions as a way to get out of talking about uncomfortable topics about their party. I mean, Hillary Clinton's loss, and now, this was clearly Biden's pivot at the State of the Union as well. We're dropping the mask mandate. We're moving past COVID, and now, he spent a good chunk of that time, understandably, on Ukraine, but I think they're must be getting a bunch of overwhelming numbers saying people want to be done with COVID. They like this response. They're anti-Putin. Same numbers Republicans are getting, which is why they changed their rhetoric a bit, after Trump was coming out and being more positive about Putin's invasion. But see, I don't understand what it is about Russia that makes them feel like, this is our get out of jail free card.
You say I'm sure they are looking at polls and internal polling. They do it constantly, and they are always looking at it. But what has been striking to me for several years now is that I think a lot of them, even faced with polling knowledge that things Democrats want and like are popular, and faced with the fact that Americans by and large are not particularly interventionist right now. They have still, rather often, gone to these national security and foreign policy lanes. And I think because they're more comfortable with them, and it's still like this 9/11 hangover, which is very bizarre. So I don't actually think they're following popular sentiment necessarily, even though I think Americans do think the war in Ukraine is important and should be focused on.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think it's more of a question of they know these popular things are out there, but they can't get them. They have failed in their attempt to deliver. So the best thing to do is to distract with something that has some sense of neutrality.
Rally around the flag
or gravitas.
Yes. I mean, this is sort of some version of four corners. We're just going to run out the clock here and just hope nothing else happens, and maybe things will stabilize. Come the fall. That seems to be the attitude. And then, but the only thing I can tell you is if they're not aware that if they're not seeing polling that this is that they should be all about, and again, this is not to minimize what's going on in Ukraine at all. I mean, it's horrible. The reporter had a good point though, COVID's also taking a lot of lives, here and abroad. What's happening in Ukraine is horrible, and but it's not like they can't. We have to stop the government from functioning.
And we also have Yeah, we have a like broader latitude just because of the screwed up way our entire system works. We have a much broader latitude for unilateral action by the government, by the administration to address what's ever going on in Ukraine, militarily, diplomatically, even economically. The White House has the ability, the power to unilaterally address that much more than it does to just spend money on antivirals for Americans, which is screwed up. But because like one way of exercising power is just easier, they would prefer to have the conversation on those terms.
And also, to be clear, I don't know what Nancy Pelosi can do about any of this in
Right.
terms of Ukraine and Russia. Like, I don't know what the Congress can do outside of like,
Well,
I mean, not good things. Let's put it that way. I mean,
No, well, but they
But-
can, try to spark World War III by reading a cringy poem.